Just to introduce myself, my name's Liz Bully and I'm a Senior Land Services Officer for Greater Sydney Local Land Services. As part of the National Landcare Program and the Tara Point funding that we get from the federal government, we've been able to bring you these free webinars, and we've managed to get a real expert in this area, which is Phil Straw. You might be able to see him on the screen there. And he's going to be presenting today on so he's going to be covering the East Asian-Australasian Flyway. So if you haven't heard of that, you're about to go into a great deep dive on that. It's really fascinating. I've looked through the presentation. I think you're all going to really enjoy it. But what I'll do first is I'll just do a very quick welcome to country. So I'll begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet today. And because of the nature of webinars, everybody's meeting on different parts of country. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So you're quite welcome to put in the chat whereabouts you're logging in from today, because that's always really interesting to see how far and wide the audience is coming from. So as I said, we're having the first of two webinars. So I'll talk a bit about the second one again at the end in case anyone missed my little blurb on it. I'll just do a very brief biography covering Phil's experience. He sent me some information. It's all very impressive, and I felt bad having to cull it down and bring it down to something I could read in a couple of minutes because there's quite a lot of information there. So I guess to start off with, Phil's involvement with wetland management and migratory birds started in 1960, where he worked for Dr. Luke Hoffman, who's pretty much seen as the founding father of the Ramsar Convention on wetlands. That was in the Camargue in the south of France. Phil was also involved in the MAR conference in 1962, which is where they called for an international convention on wetlands, following concern with how rapidly large areas of wetlands in Europe were being impacted. So this led to the birth of Ramsar. Phil left France to work at the Edward Grey Institute of Field Ornithology in Oxford, and then he soon travelled to Australia, where he worked for the Department of Zoology at Queensland University for 5 years, then the Research Department of New South Wales Fisheries, followed by the New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service. So that's a pretty varied experience there in Australia. In 1992, he formed his own company, which looked at working in the design, construction and management of wetlands, both in Australia and also in Asia. In 1996, he convened a symposium, which led to the launch of the East Asian-Australasian Shorebird Reserve Network, and subsequently 8 countries recognising that there were 19 wetland sites that were critical to the survival of these migratory species. Phil is the Australasian Water Studies Group's East Asian-Australasian Flyway Partnership Liaison Officer, and is now working with the CEPA working group of the EAAFP, including the subject of this presentation today. So I think you can see we've got good pedigree here to be passing on the information about this topic. So without any further delay, I'd like to pass over to Phil Straw and get him to go through this series of slides. I'll be actually helping Phil by just going through them myself. And yes, I'll hand over to Phil now. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Liz. Great to be here talking about my favourite subject. Okay. Well, there's the title page for here, which is very nice. Perhaps the first slide, Liz. Okay, we're talking about shorebirds. Of the shorebirds in Australia, 18 are resident species, which we won't talk about today, and 36 are migrants. And there's the pictures of the Bartell Godwit. Next slide. And these are all shorebirds. Broad-billed sandpiper at the top left, little red-necked stint in the middle at the top, and red knot top right. And then you've got eastern curlew. And in the middle of the plovers, that's one bird that comes here during our winter, not during our summer. All the rest come here during our summer. And that one comes from New Zealand. That's a double-banded plover. The Latham snipe on the right middle. And then the pratincoal, which is a bit of an oddball one. It goes onto coastal wetlands and often goes out onto the tidal flats in northwest Australia. And there's been counted up to nearly 2.1 million birds in one season. So it's very erratic, though. And then the Bartell Godwit again at the bottom. Next slide, please. Okay, the shorebirds, unlike songbirds, they work differently. Shorebirds may feed day and night, and feed according to the tide. Low tide increases the area of feeding and behavior of prey, and that's when they feed most of the time, whether it's day or night. Smaller birds tend to need to feed a bit longer because smaller birds don't eat such large amounts. And at high tide, birds roost at various roost sites. Now, this varies during the day and night. You'll see them on sandspits and many other places and beaches and things during the day, but you will not see them at night. They shift across to flooded salt marsh, shallow water, and places like that, so they can see predators approach them at night. So they're totally different behavior day and night. Next slide. Okay, most migratory shorebirds spend most of their lives on intertidal mudflats, and that's a globally declining resource because they're with us for about 6 or 7 months of the year, feeding on mudflats in Australia, and they then move on migration to their breeding grounds. Next slide, Liz. And what do they eat? Okay, you've got polychaete worms, bivalves, and little crustaceans, amphipods. With the bivalves, the red knot typically will swallow one of those, and if it's a very quiet environment, i.e. a lab where they're doing experiments, you'll hear a crunch after about 30 seconds as the gut actually crushes the shell, and then they digest the food. Next slide. Okay, let's go into the bar-tailed godwit. It's very adaptable in use of estuarine and coastal feeding habitats in and around Australia, taking prey from rather firm sandy substrate flats, as well as, next slide, and deep into soft mud. The birds detect prey with their tips of their bills. They're very sensitive. So even though the godwit not using its eyes, obviously under the mud there, but they're locating prey, and then they'll pull that up to eat. And just a picture of the bird in flight and preening its feathers after mucking around in the mud. Next one, Liz. Okay, now this bird in a fat load, we measured the amount of fat on a bird and a scale of 1 to 5. This is 5. That is, you must be about ready to go. To be able to make a non-stop flight of a week or more, a bird has to put on enough fat, which acts as fuel, to carry the bird at altitudes of 3,000 to 5,000 meters in varying weather conditions, plus obviously some in fat in reserve. Next slide. Okay, now these are flying machines. Almost like jet fighters in shape. The fat from the neck down to the base of the tail indicates they are ready to commence their first 10,000 kilometers flight from Sydney or wherever they're leaving from to the Yellow Sea region between Korea and China. Next one, Liz. Okay, now pre-migration, birds fatten up, as I said before, with 55 to 85% increased weight. Now, if you put on your weight that much, you'd find it very difficult to walk, wouldn't you? This is to fuel their flight. They don't normally get that fat because they need to be agile and keep away from predators. But once they get up in migration, they're above those sort of areas where you're going to bump into falcons and things, so you can afford to just take off and fly in the direction, in this single direction there. Now, the pre-migration also means that they have to flight muscles have to be built up to carry the load. The blood thickens with an enlarged heart, enables oxygen supply to more muscles. Decrease in size of the feeding organisms. Once they take off, they're not going to be feeding for a week or so. And then that's including the stomach, intestines, liver and kidneys. And decrease in flight non-essential muscle mass. And before they leave, as you saw by the fat bird there, complete their molt before their breeding plumage before they go, because the fittest of individuals complete this before departures, thus ensuring a greater breeding success. Next slide. Okay, during flight. Now these things are all happening during that long flight, whether it's the first one to China or onwards to Korea and also coming back. They decrease in weight due to the energy consumption, using up to a gram of fat per hour, so they're losing weight. The atrophy of the flight muscles as decreases in weight makes them redundant. Heart muscles atrophies as muscles decrease. The engine virtually shrinks with the cars, as they say. And brain chemistry changes to allow non-stop flight for days at a time. Evidence suggests that they may be able to rest sections of their brain independently as they're flying. Next slide. Okay, so we're off now on our first, no, go back one, from Australia, from Sydney or wherever, directly to between Korea and China. That's the line finishes up in the Yellow Sea. And this is the first stage of the Sydney to Alaska flight via the north end of the Yellow Sea. That's between Korea and China. A non-stop flight of 10,000 kilometers, taking up to 8 days on that first flight. So they've used a lot of energy up on that trip. Next slide. And that's just to show different species there. The godwits are the brown lines along the north coasts. Then you've got pteric sandpipers and eastern curlews that don't quite go up that far. And then it shows the trip back. So this is a bit out of date now. We've got well, we've got over 11,000 kilometers in one flight. There's been 12. The last one was up to about 13,000 kilometers. So that's about their limit, we think. So from Alaska to Australia and New Zealand return trip is 34,000 kilometers approximately. Bartard Godwits, 310 grams non-migratory weight. That's without the fat load, and 11,000 kilometers or a lot more. The flight south, first ever flight for a young bird, is quite a feat. Next one is. Okay, I can relax a bit more now. We're okay. On the northward migration, shorebirds flying to the East Asian-Australasian Flyway will stop off for 5 to 6 weeks in the Yellow Sea region of China or Korea to refuel and prepare for the breeding grounds. Now, they've used up nearly all the fat getting from Sydney to the Yellow Sea. As you can see, the tidal flats here are huge. It goes off to the horizon. Very productive feeding areas. And the 5 or 6 weeks then is to put them a big full load on again, because their next flight is going to be to Alaska, to the breeding grounds. Next slide. Where where there is very little food available for the adults when they get there. Now, although the tidal flats are extensive, there are threats to shorebirds in China, including fishing nets. Fortunately, a lot of the fishing nets are fairly easy to see, but we have to watch fishermen these days because they don't like shorebirds competing with them, and some of them use the very fine nets, almost like mist nets. So we have to tighten up the laws relating to fishermen in China, because we don't want them being caught up in a fishing nets like a mist net and be killed during the process. The little odd structure in the middle of the screen there is a dwelling that goes up and down on the tide. It's a little raft with a little house on it, and that's where fishermen spend their time between tides during the day, rather than going home and back again, which is quite a slog across such big mud flats notches as that. But you see the nets go as far as you can see. Next slide. Now the other ones, these are people collecting shellfish, as often do in Sydney and or in Australia, many places, for food. And provided these people are just collecting using their little dredges and pick them up, they're the harvesting is pretty sustainable. It's just that some people tend to these days use little pumps and that to speed things up, and that is not so sustainable. So there's obviously competition for the shrinking resource there. Next slide. And the third threat to shorebirds generally on the coast of China and Korea is industrial pollution, and I'll touch on that a bit later on, because it's not doing the feeding habitat much good, nor the food that they eat. Next slide. Okay, land reclamation for fish ponds is one of the threats in a way. It could be fish ponds or rice fields, and eventually development. You can see the habitat is quite extensive there, but they've been reclaimed. If it's fish ponds, there is often a reasonable amount of food for the birds feeding in the fish ponds, and it can feed in the ponds and roost on the banks. So the fish ponds are not too bad at all, and not so much rice paddies, or birds do feed in rice paddies during the flooded period. And next slide. Okay, at the top right hand, you can see to the extent of those tidal floods I saw before, just fish ponds and other types of marine harvesting. It could be salt pans and things like that as well. And research is being carried out. This is a young lady from Beijing Normal University helping out with the surveys up there. These are essential, but can we make a difference as to seeing? Okay, next slide. Okay, now one of the biggest threats in China and Korea, as well as Australia, is land reclamation. You'll hear, I won't go into those details in Australia, it takes us too long. And but obviously this is going to be a loss of feeding area, and this is how the sites are reclaimed on the previous slides. Next slide. Okay, this is one of the biggest disasters for shorebirds, a place called Xiamangung. You'll see a sea wall which goes about 33 kilometers, closing off what was on the right-hand side tidal flats. You can still see the faint areas of the shoals. And they originally wanted to drain this for agriculture. But as you can see by the small image there, that was actually used for development, and those areas have been built on. And so the whole area has been lost, the feeding area. So the biggest loss of feeding habitat of any one site in the whole flyway of the world. So you've got a little bit of tidal flats, but they will eventually be taken up as well. So that's huge barrages there to keep the water from those rivers coming from the right flowing straight out into the sea, and well, they then reclaim, as the little image shows there. Next one, Liz. Now, this is an interesting shot. These are a picture of a couple of hunters, of a father and son team, and this is how they would normally catch shorebirds for the market. The birds have to be caught in a good condition. You see the guys are extracting it from what we call a clap net, and you'll see the birds apparently near them, near the guy standing in the water, but they're not. They're actually decoys, and they have these decoys, and then they have a clap net folded up on the mud. And as the birds come down to investigate, they pull a string, and the clap net whizzes over the top of them. And then they catch the birds and extract them from the net, as he is doing there. Now you'll see next to him, he's got a nice big basket, which he puts the shorebirds in those. They can't fly out, but they can move around, so they're quite unharmed. And then in the top corner there, they're walking back to shore. In our case, they were moving across to the banding station, because these guys were also used by the Fudan University in Shanghai for catching birds for banding, because these are the experts. They catch a lot more birds than we can with cannon nets. And the other good thing is they come across with baskets full at a time, not a huge net full of a time, and we're banding at the rate at which they're bringing them in. And the bottom, you can see that's the banding station where we're actually banding the birds, and some of those colour marked birds we'll often now see in Australia as they come across. So these are the good guys, and with their expertise enables us this sort of work. So these guys have been helping us out. We initially asked them how much they're going to pay per kilo. And we said, no, we won't pay by birds because we're banding them. Anyway, we didn't pay them a lot of money, but it's very handy having them do this. It helped our research a lot. Next slide. Right, now when we're doing surveys of tidal flats, these are some of the bands between different fish ponds and things. It's a very narrow stretch. We use a hire little van with a local driver. And this is one of the guys from Beijing, watching that he doesn't drive off the edge. And we cover huge areas like this, which is quite painstaking and a bit of a challenge. But anyway, next one. Now, this is a place called Yellow Jiang, which is a big nature reserve now. It doesn't look like a nature reserve. But you can use fish ponds as nature reserves as well. And those are roosts of birds. You see the mass of birds on that lower bund wall, and little fence along the edge of it there. And that's thousands and thousands of birds can roost on those there and even feed in the ponds or fly between those banks and the intertidal shores. So this provides an excellent stopover site for migratory shorebirds. So that's one benefit for these sites. Next one, Liz. Okay, now the birds are fattened up after that time in the Yellow Sea, up to their full capacity, because these birds are now flying across to Alaska, and these birds, once they arrive there, these are the adults, don't really have any food there. The whole idea is for laying eggs at the right time of year for the chicks to rear. So they've got to arrive, the females, to lay eggs. That's why they need to be really fat before they leave, because they use most of the resources, fat reserves up in laying eggs, and the males establishing territories and such like. Next slide. And this is the tundra in Alaska. It's a big sort of wet, boggy sort of area with lots of pools and such like for the birds to feed. And you'll see by the next slide that Next slide, Liz. This is the tundra is a very boggy area, and that's as high as the vegetation grows in the tundra there. And that's including the little trees and grasses and such like. And the birds can feed to some extent in the lagoons there. But as we go on to the next slide, there's a few little berries and that. Not many shorebirds eat the berries. Some species do, but at that time, that's about all there is on that on the tidal flat there. And the next slide. This is a godwit on the breeding grounds, a male. This is pretty well camouflaged. Also, the tundra is pretty flat there. They can see any approach of any predators, which is what they feel happy with. They can be sitting down, camouflage themselves, and they can watch out for predators that might attach, which I'll show you in a short while. Next slide. And this is the female nestled down into the tundra. Near a beak there, that's a willow tree of the about the height that grows willow trees in Alaska, and other little shrubs and things growing around her, and she fits in quite well there. Next slide. Now, this is what it's all about. This is a friend of mine, Lena Alapo, Dr. Alapo. She's works for the Academy of Sciences in Moscow, and the timing of the hatchlings of chicks coincide with the hatching of billions of insects during the short but 24-hour daylight summer. Now, the chicks are not fed by the adults. Even if you see a mouse lapwing walking in your park, you'll see the chicks are not being fed. They go around feeding themselves, pecking on the ground. So these birds have to be able to feed themselves, and they come out and they've got these insects coming out of the vegetation there. All they do is just walk around and eat during the time there until they reach full size and are able to fly. By which time the females have already left because they've already used most of their reserves up, and the males are left to look after the chicks. Next slide. One of the big issues there is predators, the Arctic fox. This is not a shorebird egg, it's a goose egg. And so predation is one thing they have to watch out for, and as birds do anywhere in the world, I suppose. And the adults are the ones that draw predators away from the chicks and helps them protect them that way. And the next slide is another predator. Is the long-tailed skua. They also will take chicks and eggs, small chicks and eggs, and they're quite plentiful as well. We also get snowy owls and a few other birds of prey up there as well. Okay, the next slide, Liz. Now, you've all heard about lemmings, and we have lemming years. There's sort of myths about them running off cliffs and things like that, and numbers. But anyway, in a good lemming year, the predation pressure on shorebirds is much lower, resulting in a higher survival rate. So it's a good shorebird year when you've got a good lemming year. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so as I said, the females at this stage have already gone back. The males now move down to the intertidal flats of Alaska, where the young birds switch feeding from the tundra habitat to the habitat they'll be using for the rest of their lives, and that's intertidal mudflats. And that's a different type of food. And here they must fatten up, and the mudflats there are very productive. And the males will leave shortly after this, as soon as they've got enough fat on, and leave the young to fatten up themselves. And eventually the young that have been deserted by the adults will follow on and start flying across the world's biggest ocean, the Pacific Ocean, to an unknown destination. That's an instinct that's built into all migratory birds, is a direction to fly, but not knowing where they're going. Next slide. This is the distance they fly. Young birds haven't flown there before. The adults have already gone. And this is 11,000 or now up to 13,000 per kilometre per flight that we know in 9 days. Now it's 9 days without stops on the way. You're flapping your wings continuously for that period of time. And the birds don't know it, but eventually they will hit land if they keep flying far enough. The adults, once they get there, already know from the landscape where they're going, and they always go back to the beach that they used in previous years. The young birds don't know. They just land on the coast and match up with any other shorebirds feeding on the intertidal mudflats, and until it's time for them to do the return migration. Okay, the next slide. And that flight is about the limits of endurance of shorebirds. The young birds obviously suffer more than adults. The 3 birds in the front, the one with its wings up and the one behind it in front, are young birds. And you see the one struggling to stand up. The tide just coming in a little bit there, and it's getting a bit wet. So it's trying to stand up there. You can see it. It's actually at the limits of endurance. Because once they land, they have to switch back to feeding mode after that migration, and then start feeding as soon as they can after that, to just enough flight body weight to fly around, because they won't need to put on fat load until they return. But the survival of the birds is high, with the birds having completed these epic journeys over their lifespan, that is of 20 to 30 years. Adults back and forth all that time. They travel a huge amount of distance during their life just doing migration. And at the end of each migration, most birds have depleted all of their reserves. Juveniles, as I said before, particularly find it very, very hard. And some of them, of course, don't make it. Next slide. Right. Now, is it safe back to Australia when they get back? Well, not really. Loss of habitat and disturbance are serious threats to shorebirds in Australia. If shorebirds cannot put on enough fat for the journey at the end of the time in Australia when they fly back to the breeding grounds, in fact, there's no migration, and therefore no recruit. So that means that the population may decline if it gets too bad. Birds are often disturbed at their feeding areas, chased by dogs, kept away from the feeding and roost sites by jet skis, kite surfing, etc. And sites of international importance for migratory shorebirds around Australia are the responsibility and management by state conservation agencies. Whereas in a lot of countries, the NGOs are pretty big and they often do management of sites, but in Australia, it's just the governments. The site managers of the about 200 sites in Australia may know little about migratory shorebirds. Now, as a part of work that I am part of working groups, I'm working with those colleagues in the East Asian Flyway to establish a waterbird site manager network that is training people up, providing training materials and such like, just try to improve the management of sites in Australia. And that is not just in Australia, but throughout the Flyway, because a lot of birds go to quite all of the other countries between the Arctic and Australia, and some of them don't come, of course, this far south, but stay up there in those countries. In Australia, the biggest challenge will be, let's say, the biggest challenge will also be to run the site manager training program, which I just mentioned. Next one. Okay, we don't see so much drastic and obvious dumping of rubbish on wetlands these days. People realise they're not wastelands. But just down below, you see a fisherman quite innocently nesting off a beach or a sandspit, and not knowing that normally at high tide is an important roost site until it's explained to him and he might move on. But the other one is dogs. Dogs chase birds. Some people say, oh, well, they're only chasing seagulls and not doing any real damage. But every time the dog chases the birds, they're using up reserves of the fat that they might be putting on towards the time to go down migration. And this may affect their ability to migrate. So we have to make people aware of all these disturbances, and it happens in a lot of places. Local councils don't always stop people from letting dogs run off leash, and that's one big issue that we're fighting in the moment. Next slide. Okay, this is Botany Bay. In 1942, the north side of Botany Bay was an incredible place for shorebirds. The early ornithologists used to do a lot of work there, counting thousands of migratory shorebirds. And that was the main area. And south side, not so much, but you'll see that now the south side's all that's left. But anyway, although wetlands have been reclaimed for Sydney Airport, extensive tidal flats still stretch across much of the northern shores of the bay, several thousand shorebirds counting. You can just see where the river, Cook's River, there's a snake. There's a very faint cross there, which is what was an airport in 1942, and nothing compared with what we get these days. And the next slide shows a line across virtually what we're just looking at. Since then, we have Port Botany in the top right, the extension of the airport, the Cook's River that came out at the top there, just like two dark lines coming down to where the old Cook's River used to come out. It's been diverted, now comes out on the left there, retained by rock walls and such like, so it doesn't provide an estuary at all. And we had the main runway, which is the fat one, a short one there, and there was in the 1960s. And in 1992, they started developing the parallel runway, which is the long figure there. So there's lots of practically all wetlands on the northern shores. Some species have all but disappeared from that area. Next slide. Okay, this is just to give you a quick vision of what we've gone through, and the flight pattern of E7, a very famous female godwit who had a satellite tracker and followed that whole route from Australia to China to Alaska and back down again to New Zealand in this case. So, and that one was about 13,500 kilometers in 11 days from Alaska. And this is a record. Next slide. Okay, we're getting towards the end now. There's some good news. This is the world's largest World Heritage Site. It happens to be the tidal flats in China and Korea I was showing you before. When Xi Jinping, the current president of China, got into power, he realized that a lot of illegal coastal development was taking place, and he drew a red line down the coast and said any development on here that's not approved and not built on will be confiscated and the site's protected. And there's just a huge area of tidal flats. There's the biggest tidal flats in the world. So it's a very important, what we call the Yellow Sea area for migratory shorebirds. And until this period, they were being lost at a high rate, as you saw from the previous slides. And the next slide. And this is the celebration of the declaration of the World Heritage Site of the Bohai Bay is one particularly, that was the area we just looked at. which is one of the most important places for migratory shorebirds in the world. And I think that might be the end. Just have a look, next slide. Yeah. All right, well, that's the story in a nutshell. So Liz, you're going to be getting any questions, or do you want to take the questions?
Yeah, I'm just having a little look. Has anyone put any, I'm just wondering if there are some questions. We did put down, if anyone has anything from, they want to know a little bit more information on, something that you want expanded on. I'm hoping a couple of questions do come up there, but yeah, I find that amazing that you can go 13,500 kilometres in 11 days. It's just, you know, I do a 4-hour drive and I'm exhausted and it's the car doing all the work, but I just find it incredible that these birds can travel like they do.
Now, this is not stopping. You can't glide. You're not gliding like a lot of the birds do. You're actually flapping the wings for that length of time. So it's a bit of an endurance, to say the least.
So I'm assuming they're I've heard some people say that when birds are migrating, they're sleeping on the wing.
Yeah,
are these birds doing that?
Well, they reckon that they can rest certain parts of the brain. Probably in the text there, which I probably didn't pick up. So they're in a way they're resting their brain as they're migrating over that period of time. Yeah, it's a lot more research has to be done really on migration, how they navigate and everything else. I mean, a young bird that flies across the Pacific, something it's never done before, and keep flying until it land at the other end, which of course I was completely unaware of. Or the adults have been doing it for a long time, of course.
Yeah, and it's amazing they know which direction to fly in when they've never done it before. I find that amazing as well.